how bad are things? Like, what do these laws actually state, right? So what's the real thing that's been going on? There was a program created. Well, first of all, you had the eviction moratorium, which they kind of like banned evictions. So that's pretty clear what that did, right? You couldn't evict someone because of that moratorium.
And when was that passed? When was that law passed?
That was I don't remember, but that would have been like 2021 maybe.
And this was set up purely for the pandemic to protect tenants
Yeah,
during the
because
pandemic.
of the pandemic. Right.
Yeah.
But the problem before, I wasn't a homeowner then, so I didn't get the full perspective. But I did. While I was happy that they did this because I realized that there were people that were going to be left behind. Um, and I ironically, because you talk to a typical, let's call it online progressive, and they would look at me as some kind of capitalist savage or whatever. But I, again, I don't come from money, right? So I know what it's like to not have, and to wonder about like what bill you're gonna pay and which one you're not gonna pay, and running from phone calls. You get a phone call, anonymous number, you're like, is that some debt collector? You know what I mean? So I appreciated them providing the support for people who might need it and struggle because of the pandemic. But I did think to myself, but what about the landlords? Right? I mean, they got a mortgage. Like I said, when you're doing that, you need to be, if you're gonna freeze the rent, you need to freeze the mortgages as well.
Yeah, because what they're doing is going to have a repercussion on something else, and that's if this didn't even happen and someone mentioned this to me, the first thing I would think of is, well, how the landlord's not going to get the money. So where's the package of money for the landlord in this situation? And
Yeah, it's like you're running a business, your expenses, your mortgage, and obviously maintenance of the property. But if you're not getting that rent to pay your mortgage, then how there's a massive gap there where you're just left with a mortgage liability whilst the tenants aren't paying any rent.
It's almost in some way a super simplistic analogy. Like you have some people who are homeless who need certain medical supplies, and then you come up with this plan that you're gonna go. There's a local hospital. And you're just gonna take it from there and give it to these homeless people. And you're like, this is great that you're gonna do that. But then realizing the full logistics of it, you're like, wait a minute, but what about the people in the hospital that need those supplies? Because it's not like it's extra supplies. It's like they're needed. But the way it's thought of is like it's tunnel vision. It's just there's these homeless people that need the medical supplies, and the hospital has it, and you give it to them. Great, this is wonderful. Meanwhile, there's patients in the hospital that are like, "Hey, where's our medicine?" And no one's talking about them. There's no focus on them. It's just like, oh, the homeless people, they need it. And my thing is, let's help the homeless people, but let's not do it where it's like I'm gonna sink these people to save those. No, can we meet halfway to where, right? So maybe we do some kind of rationing system where we look into the hospital usage, and it's like, do we really need to use as much of these supplies? Some of these patients actually don't need this, and there's alternatives. Like, tweak it to where the patients in the hospital are getting taken care of, and you're just taking from the excesses, right? And then you take those excesses and you give to the homeless. So the homeless are getting help, and then the hospital's getting taken care of. But no, the mentality was, we just got to help the renters, and they do the rental program, which is great. But then it's like they don't talk about the homeowners. Um, and please remind me, we have to talk about to me, the American progressive mindset of the way they think about the poor versus the middle class and class warfare. We've got to talk about that. But I want to first talk about the program. So the moratorium was the eviction, stopping evictions. The thing that was really the thorn in my side was something called ERAP, which most people probably don't even know about. It's the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. That program has to be one of the most horrific programs that I've ever heard about. So such a savage and disgusting. I mean, I've never seen something in my life. Um, on the surface, it sounds good. Like if I were like an online, like a progressive influencer, I could really sell it very well to a progressive audience as like, this is so great and it's going to help all these homeless people and whatever, because there is a good side to it. And fundamentally, it sounds good in theory. So here's the basic thing, right? This program actually does exactly what we said the other one should. Remember we said take care of the landlord? That's what this program on the surface is supposed to do. This is what it does. It basically makes it almost impossible to evict someone. So if you're poor and you can't pay your rent because of COVID or whatever, like you get to stay in your home and not get kicked out. Your landlord can't kick you out for non-payment. It specifically addresses eviction based on non-payment. That's not the only reason, but that's that's the main thing that it's there for. So it basically says, if I want to evict someone and the basis is that they are not paying the rent, they can't do it. I can't do it if someone's in that program, right? And the program is supposed to also take care of the landlord. So the thing is, I can't evict them, right? And the government's going to come in and pay the rent on behalf of the renter. Sounds good, right? That's what you're supposed to do, right? Right, but what's the problem? Again, this is the thing with tribalism. If a left-wing channel would probably tell you about that side of it, and it sounds great. And if I heard this, I would be like, that's awesome. That's what they should have been doing. That's what the moratorium was a failure. This is really great. Here's the problem. They didn't have the money. But yet they still put in the protections. So you have a thing that says you can't evict someone because they're in this program that's supposed to pay the rent for them. And you don't have the money to pay the rent for them, but you're still going to allow them to live for free anyway. So it's almost like it's like a evil genius thing, right? Because on the surface it sounds good, but the reality is it's doing the same thing as the moratorium. You still have a situation where you have people that are allowed to not pay the rent, and you still have the landlord that's not being taken care of, because it doesn't matter that there's money that's allocated, whatever. It's not, if it's not being given out, like my mortgage doesn't wait. Every month the mortgage has to be paid. So my thought process is, if you don't have the money for this program, you can't do the program, right? You can't have a program that's supposed to pay the rent and you don't have the money to pay the rent, and you're just going to leave the protections like what? But they were doing that. So they had this program and landlords weren't getting paid. I mean, not totally, like some of them were getting paid. It was like all over the place. I remember you probably saw in the news, they said something like 90% of the funds were not distributed. I think this falls into part of that, to where government corruption, whatever the issue was, bottom line is a bunch of homeowners were not getting paid. Now, the program gets worse. This is so sick, the way that this thing is set up. And you wouldn't know this. Like, I did the research to find this out. I did a lot of digging. I looked at previous court cases and I learned about this stuff. The way that the law is written, if I accept a dime of this money, I'm making a 12-month commitment. So, and it's kind of weird because the program seems like on the surface, it doesn't really allow you to evict someone, but by you accepting money, it kind of more solidifies it even more, right? Because they say from the period of time, from the first check is received for the next 12 months, you can't increase the rent and you can't evict them. So you have someone who, maybe taking advantage of the program that's being a nuisance, like my situation or whatever. And this is why I think it's sick. So you have someone like me who's desperate. I'm running on fumes. I'm running into a lot of my credit because I don't have the cash to pay the mortgage by myself. So I really need the money. And then, like a dog that's chained up and starving, you dangle this like red meat in front of me. I'm starving and I'm chained up. I can't get it. And you're just like, dang, look at this juicy meat. Like, oh, this money is here. Come get this money. But in the analogy with the dog, the meat has poison in it. So it's like, you really want it because you're really hungry, but you also know, like, if you bite this thing, you're going to die because it's got poison in it, right? So the same thing. If and when the money becomes available, you touching it is committing you to another 12 months of a scenario where, like I said, you're abandoned. If you have a normal tenant that's just like they're struggling financially, then that's fine. Because 12 months, whatever. And you know, this was your tenant. Like, these are tenants I inherited. Let's say it's somebody that you rented to, right? So we had a normal, regular relationship. They lost their job. They're struggling. 12-month commitment. Again, on the surface, it sounds good. That's fine. I wouldn't have a problem with that. If one of my tenants that I brought on ran into a difficulty and they needed the help, I'm not worried about that. But the problem when you create a system like this is when you have, you know, people like what I have, who are just awful people, you enable them to really, you know what I mean? Like, they're going to be there for another year of being like a boss where they can do whatever and I can't do anything.